Curator Selix of the Sayalari archives floated in a gentle tumble within the observation sphere of the vessel-nested orbits, but the mind that watched them was not confined to a single pair of translucent eyes. Outside, the distant star was a soft pinprick against black. Inside, columns of light rose around Selix, each column a stream of memory fragments, testimonies, and official entries in the debts of kindness ledger. Sayalari bodies were long and glass-like, their internal organs visible as slow drifting shadows, but their thoughts were crisp and methodical. Selix was older than most of the crew, and older still than most of the histories that played before them. Yet there were some entries in the archive that Selix revisited with a particular reverence, and all of them shared one anomaly: the same species, appearing again and again, helping others for no measurable gain. Humans. The columns of light shifted as Selix ran a search query with a lazy flick of one delicate hand. Symbols and languages from dozens of civilizations flickered past: rescue missions, hospital ships, ceasefires, food deliveries in seasons of famine. A human word appeared often, its translation rendered imperfectly across tongues: kindness. Selix focused on a cluster of entries tagged with the same poetic label, added long ago by a sentimental Sayalari scribe: the blue home. As the cluster expanded, an external alert chimed. Nested Orbits was receiving something over the Echo Net, that old, sprawling, creaky network of relays humanity had helped seed during an earlier, more optimistic era. Selix paused the archive and accepted the incoming transmission. The message unfolded as raw telemetry, compressed spectral maps, and then, embedded in the headers as if it had been an afterthought, a line of conventional language translated by the ship's systems into Sayalari and dozens of others automatically. To all who still remember us, we cannot face this alone. Selix did not yet know how many eyes and minds across the galaxy were reading those same words in that same moment, but the observer knew. The call would echo through deserts and coral cities, through hive minds and caravans, through old battlefields and quiet schools. This is the story of how they answered, and of why. On the flagship ITS Aegis Dawn, Earth Defense Command watched death creep closer in precise increments. Admiral Ryan Holt stood at the forward holotank, hands clasped behind his back. He was tall for a human, not in the exaggerated way alien observers sometimes imagined, but with an economy of motion that came from a lifetime of service. Lines at the corners of his eyes marked long years of squinting at threat displays and crew rosters. In the air before him, a ghostly map of the Sol system spun slowly. The outer rim, near the scattered ice bodies, was smeared with a dim gray fog. "That is the Pale Bloom Front," said Dr. Eleni Marcoux, gesturing with a small stylus. Her hair was tied back in a hasty knot, and the bruised dark crescents under her eyes spoke of nights without sleep. "The leading edge of the Gravemind Lattice. This telemetry is from the last functioning probe station at the system fringe." The fog pulsed faintly. Inside it, here and there, pinpricks winked into existence, flared, then went dark. Each pinprick was a machine or a rock with a transmitter, one more electronic voice falling silent as null-wave filaments swept past. "How long until it reaches the orbit of Neptune?" Holt asked. Eleni did not look at her notes. "Best estimate? About 8 days, if the stochastic model holds. And from there to Earth? Depending on how it threads through the inner system's gravity wells?" She exhaled, then committed, knowing he valued clarity over comfort. "Between 19 and 30 hours after that." The room around them hummed quietly with life. Officers at consoles, soft chimes of data updates, the faint vibration of engines adjusting the ship's position above Earth. Director Hana Al-Karim's face appeared in a corner of the hollow, relayed up from the Pacific Spire, the Oceanic Elevator, and United Terran Assembly Command Hub that jutted from the Pacific like a silver needle. "Admiral," she said, "the Assembly has confirmed. Our first priority must be evacuation of essential personnel and genetic repositories. We can't stop that thing. We should not delude ourselves." Holt's jaw tightened. Inside, there was a pulse of refusal. He had dedicated his life to preventing exactly this sort of admission. Outwardly, his voice was even. "Director, with respect, we do not yet know what we can or cannot stop." Eleni tapped another control. New data popped into the display. Simulations, colored arcs, and probabilistic clouds, every line ending in the same region of darkness. The Gravemind Lattice, she said, almost to herself as much as to them, does not negotiate. It does not even target in any conventional sense. It expands. It co-opts mass and energy into its structure, leaves behind irradiated wreckage and half-phased debris. The first silence wiped out an entire sector before anyone knew what was happening. We are lucky to have warning at all. Holt remembered the first time he had studied classified files on the first silence. Entire systems ceasing transmission, telescopes recording stars that dimmed with a strange, wrong regularity, like candles guttering in a vacuum. He looked back at the gray fog. "And the veil array?" he asked. Eleni's gaze shifted to another projection, a delicate ring structure encircling the sun, made of thousands of linked platforms like an artist's wire sculpture at impossible scale. "If we fire it as designed," she said, "we get a moderately amplified solar output in specific wavelengths. It might scorch some lattice fragments. It will not stop the front. It was built as a research tool and deterrent, not as this." Holt heard the unspoken word. "Not as a suicide bomb." He nodded slowly. "Then tell me about the other option." There was a small silence. Officers pretended not to listen, which meant they listened all the more. "The beacon Cascade," Eleni said. She expanded an internal model of the array. Now its thin ring was threaded with new colors, green for alien technologies that had been studied, yellow for hypothetical modifications. "I designed it as a thought experiment," she admitted. "If we overdrive the veil array, shape the output as a series of tailored pulses, and couple that with localized field manipulations, we can turn Sol into a beacon that pushes harmonic stress into the anchor nodes the lattice uses in neighboring space. Done correctly, the Cascade could destabilize the lattice's structure near us, perhaps break its grip on several adjacent parsecs." Holt understood that part, a strategic pulse that would ripple outward and break the enemy's foundation. "And the cost?" Director Hanna asked, though she knew. The assembly had analysts of its own. Eleni swallowed. "The array was never meant to handle that load," she said. "The feedback will hammer our local environment. Gravity waves, radiation surges, induced currents. Best case, we lose most satellites, stations, and a good chunk of our orbital habitats. Earth will suffer significant climate perturbations and some surface casualties." "And worst," Holt pressed. She took a breath. "Worst case, we partially destabilize the sun's outer layers or miscalculate the harmonic intervals. That could cause a flare sequence beyond anything in recorded solar history. The sky shield lattice might not hold. Earth's biosphere could be stripped or cooked." The word hung there. Cooked. Hanna's face tightened in the holo. "So our options are extinction by Gravemind or possible extinction by our own hand." "Not quite," Eleni said carefully. "There is a way to tip the odds." Holt studied her. "You want to call for help?" he said. Her eyes met his, surprised but not. He had always been quick. "Yes," she said. "We need more data on lattice resonance from other systems that have encountered it. We need more mass in orbit to act as energy sinks. We need technologies we did not invent." Director Hanna frowned. "The United Terran Assembly has spent a century stepping back from entanglements. We turned inward after the colonies' war and the dissonant years. Why would anyone answer us now?" Another voice joined the conversation, calm and edged with dry humor. "They might answer because we answered them once." Ambassador Olivar Crest's projection appeared beside Hanna's. He was older than Holt by a decade, his hair white and thin, his eyes sharp behind round lenses he refused to replace with corrective implants. "Ambassador," Holt said. "Admiral," Crest replied. "Doctor, Director." He nodded to each. "The Assembly has been reviewing a certain archival pattern, and I have been asked to offer a suggestion." He spread his hands as if laying cards on a table. "For some time," he said, "we humans had a habit of turning up where we were not strictly needed. Hospital ships in war zones, engineers in collapsing cities, mediators in disputes where we had no economic stake. We were loud and irritating and often broke protocols, but we rarely left without trying to fix something." Holt remembered. He had been a young lieutenant then, on ships that bore crates of vaccines and organs instead of missiles. Crest went on. Most of the galaxy treated it as a quirk. Some called us sentimental, some called us dangerous. After the quiet century began and we retreated to mend our own world, it was easy to assume such acts were forgotten. But the Sayalari archives, the Ixan treaty banks, even the Brannick guild logs, there are records of what we did. He leaned in slightly. We built up something we never taxed and never tallied, debts of kindness. His eyes glinted. We have never asked to collect. Director Hana's skepticism was plain. You propose we broadcast a plea and trust to old gratitude? I propose we broadcast truth, Kress said. Complete tactical data on the lattice for anyone listening. An open invitation to evacuate our citizens if we fail. And one honest sentence that we, who always prided ourselves on arriving when others called, are calling now. Anyone who remembers will decide for themselves what that is worth. Holt felt, deep inside, a stubborn reluctance. Humans protected. Humans intervened. They did not ask to be saved. It felt like reversing an arrow that had always pointed outward from Earth. Yet he also saw, with the clarity that had earned him this post, that pride was a poor shield against cosmological annihilation. He looked at the slow creep of the pale bloom front. All right, he said. We send the call. Director Hana pressed her lips together, then nodded. The Assembly concurs. Ambassador Crest, you have authorization to draft the message. Admiral, coordinate with communications. Holt turned his head. Lieutenant D'Souza, he said, raising his voice slightly. At a console to the side, Lieutenant Amara D'Souza jolted, then swiveled her chair. She was young, sharp-eyed, with a streak of near-audible curiosity always fizzing beneath her formal demeanor. Yes, Admiral? Prepare a wideband Echo Net transmission, maximum redundancy. Patch Ambassador Crest's office through for content. When they are done, you will be the one to send it. She blinked, surprised at the honor. Sir, the Echo Net is barely holding. Half those relays haven't been checked in decades. Then we're due a little luck, Holt said, and if there is one thing humans have always counted on, it is that some antique piece of tech we forgot about will be the thing that saves us. Laughter rippled lightly across the command deck, an easing of tension. Amara turned back to her console, fingers flying as she coaxed power into the old sub-channels. Deep in the solar system, ancient relay buoys woke from sleep at her call, their rusting processors stuttering, then aligning. In Ambassador Crest's modest office in the Pacific Spire, he stared at a blank text field for a long moment. His first drafts were too long, too pleading, too grandiose. He deleted and condensed, again and again, until the message was lean and precise. Data, coordinates, a sketch of the beacon cascade concept. At the end, he added one line. To all who still remember us, we cannot face this alone. He hesitated, then appended 4 words humans had once heard from so many mouths in so many tongues. Please, help us if you can. He hit send. On its Aegis dawn, that packet arrived at Lieutenant D'Souza's station. She scanned it once, feeling a chill at the flat honesty of it, then composed the Echo Net envelope. Broad spectrum, repeated burst, relay cascading. Admiral, she said, Echo Net is ready, on your order. Holt gave a single nod. Transmit. Amara touched the control. Somewhere between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, a faded, pitted station spun in slow, lopsided grace. Once it had been a proud relay for early exploratory missions. Now it shuddered as its ancient antennae flared with power for the first time in generations. The message left Sol in a widening sphere, racing along sublight routes to the nearest functional nodes, then hitching rides on FTL piggyback carriers, sliding along conversion channels, taking every opportunistic path like water, following cracks in stone. Back on the Aegis dawn, the pale bloom front advanced with implacable patience. Humanity had cast its voice into the dark. For a time, there was only waiting. Far from Sul, across a gulf of black, the Tessari city ship Dawn Petal drifted through a nebula that glowed faintly green. Tails of the Tessari dangled lightly from a living branch that curled along the observation atrium's ceiling. Their body was a cascade of interwoven vines and leaves, draped in bioluminescent motes. Photosynthetic cells drank in starlight trickling through the nebula dust. Sap pulsed lazily in internal channels that served them as blood did humans. Dawn Petal's hull was grown, not built. Branches met in vaulted arches, every surface alive with moss, fruit, or flower. Tessari engineers coaxed their ships into shapes through careful pruning and nutrient flows. At 4 p.m. by a human clock, according to the Dawn Petal's adjusted schedule, a chime reverberated through its living wood. A new message had arrived in the communal nexus. Tails unfolded themselves from the branch and flowed down to the floor. As an envoy to other species, they kept their limbs more compact and humanoid than most of their kin, an accommodation they had picked up working with humans years ago. They brushed a leaf against the nearest comm node, a bulb studded with sensory cilia. Information flooded into their mind in scent, color, and borrowed language. Echo net packet, origin, sol system, source, United Terran Assembly. Tails felt a stir in their xylem, humans. They let the translation filter engage. At once, the nebula around them seemed to recede. The atrium became a bubble of silence as they listened. To all who still remember us, we cannot face this alone. The words carried embedded images, the spectral signature of the Gravemind Lattice, simulation of the pale bloom front, schematics of the veil array, and the hypothetical beacon cascade. The last line, hastily added, trembled with something that was not quite fear and not quite shame. Please, help us if you can. Tails' memory grew a new shoot, and from that shoot branched an older one, laden with a moment from decades before. They remembered the smell of sick wood. The Tessari plague had come in a warm summer, spreading from root cluster to root cluster across their conquered's greatest garden world. A rogue fungal spore, mutated by industrial runoff, had turned voracious. It devoured structural lignin, left hollows in living trunks. City branches sagged and snapped, fruit fell black and rotten to the soil below. Panicked councils had begged for help from the galactic community. They received offers of samples, condolences, research assistance from afar. No one was willing to risk quarantine breach by coming in person. No one until the Terran humanitarian fleet's hospital ship, ITS Kindness, had altered course. Captain Jun Park had been small, compact, impatient. They had marched off their landing shuttle and demanded to see infected branches, ignoring polite protests about decontamination protocols. They had hacked together a mobile lab in a quarantined glade and brought in Tessari healers and biologists, babbling in 3 languages about enzyme assays and gene drives. When Tessari trade partners threatened embargo if humans kept violating the quarantine, Park had rolled their human eyes and said, "Then you can come and force it yourselves." They had stayed until the fungal strain was mapped, a counterfungus designed, and the first new shoots grew clean. Tessari elders had offered payment. Park had shrugged and said, "Plant some of our trees if you like. Humans are sentimental. We like reminders." Tails had been a junior liaison then, roots barely matured. They remembered standing with Park beneath a young Terran oak, grown from seed in Tessari soil, as Park had mused, "Doing the right thing when nobody's looking. That's supposed to be the test, right?" Now, in Dawn Petal's atrium, Tails felt sap surge faster. They brushed another leaf against the comm node. "Notify the council," they murmured. "Emergency session. Subject, the Blue Home's call." The Tessari Council was a ring of elders suspended in a chamber filled with diffuse green light. Their bodies were great interwoven trunks, ancient leaves a darker green than Tails' vibrant young ones. When Tails presented the human message, the chamber rustled with complex emotional sense: fear, pity, caution. "The Gravemind Lattice devours all," one elder intoned. "What can our branches do to stop the storm? Better to seal our roots, protect our own forests." "It is far," another whispered. "Too far. By the time our ships arrive, the Blue Home may already be dust." Tails let their own bioluminescence brighten until they had the room's attention. "Humans did not weigh distance when they came to us," they said. "They risked contamination, embargo, and death to save our concord. The question is not whether we can save them. It is whether we are the sort of beings who try." A murmur swept the council. "They taught us a phrase," Teles added, letting memory scent fill the space. "Doing the right thing when nobody's looking. The galaxy is looking now. Not at us, perhaps, but at them. At whether anyone remembers." Silence. Then, slowly, an elder tilted a branch. "You propose committing our fleet?" she asked. "I propose we commit ourselves," Tails said. "Ships, healers, energy harvesters. The beacon cascade will need living structures to absorb heat. Our city ships can help shape those flows. We will not arrive in time to stand in their first line, but we can stand in the second and the third." The council's leaves trembled. At length the oldest among them, whose trunk had shaped the Concord's laws, spoke. "Then it is decided," she said. "Dawnpetal will lead a Tessari fleet to the Blue Home. We will answer, as they once did." As the council adjourned, Tails glided back through the living corridors toward the flight decks. Dawnpetal's branches were already shifting, buds swelling where new drives would grow. Lights along the hull intensified in determination. In the observation sphere of nested orbits, far away, Curator Celix saw the Echo Net logs note Tessari fleet mobilization and felt a glimmer of satisfaction. One thread of debt had tightened, others were stirring. On a scarred desert world under a red sun, Commander Rekesh of the Kelrun Enclave stood atop a crumbling battlement and stared down at a memory. The city below him was officially a memorial site now. Preserved ruins, cracked water towers still blackened from orbital strikes, old bunkers half buried in sand. It had been his home during the Civil War, when Kelrun clans had turned on one another over water rights and ancient grievances. Rekesh's 4 arms were folded across his chest, scaled elbows resting on scale. One of his upper hands unconsciously drifted to the pale scar that ran along his left mandible, where shrapnel had once torn away flesh. "Commander," a junior officer called from the ridge behind him, "we received an Echo Net packet, marked as priority and anomalous." He did not turn. "From whom?" "Origin Sol System, United Terran Assembly." Humans. Rekesh's mind dropped, as if through a trap door, into a day when the sky was full of smoke and fire, and something unexpected. The Civil War had been in its 7th year then, though he did not think of the numeral. Years had blended into a smear of sieges and counter-sieges. Rekesh had been a young officer in the Loyalist forces, defending this very city against the breakaway clans. The enemy had cut off water and power, forcing the city into slow strangulation. Hospitals turned away, all but the worst wounded. Triage lines stretched along rubble-strewn streets. Then, a human ship had appeared above the red sun, broadcasting on every open frequency. "Attention, Kelrun combatants. This is the Terran vessel ITS Triage of the Terran Humanitarian Fleet. We carry medical supplies and personnel. We are neutral. We will evacuate and treat wounded from both sides." Both sides had told them to stay away. The Loyalist command feared spies. The rebels feared propaganda. Rekesh himself had argued in a bunker thick with heat and dust that humans would only complicate matters. The humans had come anyway. Its triage had rammed itself through the blockade, its hull scorched by orbital fire. It had parked in a burning plaza and opened its bays. Human medics in light armor had fanned out, dragging Kelrun civilians and soldiers alike into its sterile halls. Rekesh remembered the first time he had seen them up close, small, almost frail, yet radiating a reckless energy. One medic had shoved him aside to get at a collapsed child, snarling something untranslatable that the translator rendered as, "Move your scaly behind." Later, when the rebels launched an indiscriminate bombardment on the plaza, human and Kelrun alike had thrown themselves over stretchers. Rekesh had seen a human doctor kneel over a rebel fighter with half his chest burned, ignoring Loyalist commanders demanding attention. "We do not sort by ideology," she had said. "We sort by survivability." A stray shell had detonated near the hospital ship's ramp. Rekesh had been caught in the blast, thrown into a wall. He remembered lying stunned, heat and dust everywhere, ears ringing, and seeing a human form loom into view. The medic had been small, helmet visor cracked, one arm torn and bleeding. He had dropped to his knees beside Rekesh, slapped a tourniquet on his shattered leg, and then, when the shelling intensified, flung himself over Rekesh's body, shielded him with his own. Later, in the triage bay, Rekesh had seen that human on a neighboring cot, chest bandaged, breathing shallowly. He had wanted to speak, to ask why. The medic had only smiled weakly and said, "You were closer," before sliding into unconsciousness. The human had died in surgery that night, lungs too torn to repair. Rakesh had never learned his name. Now, in the burned city that was no longer under siege, Rakesh closed his eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them. "Play the message," he told his junior. The EchoNet packet uploaded to his cranial implant. At once, the desert heat seemed to recede as cold data poured in, gravimetric readings, spectral charts, projections of the Gravemind Lattice, and then the human words in Kelrun tongue. "To all who still remember us, we cannot face this alone. Please, help us if you can." Rakesh gripped the battlement until his scaled knuckles whitened. Months later, their wounds had been treated, the civil war had slouched to an uneasy ceasefire, and a human envoy had stood in front of a mixed chamber of Kelrun commanders. "You owe us nothing," the envoy had said. "Our medics did what they chose to do. It is between them and their consciences." But culture did not work that way on the desert world. Debts were woven into expectations like thread. A drink of water created obligation. A life saved created something deeper than gold. Rakesh turned from the ruins, his decision already hardened. "Notify High Command," he said. "Emergency session. I am invoking the Honor Covenant." His junior stiffened. "Commander, that applies to personal matters, not— Saving my life in a war zone is personal," Rakesh snapped. Then he calmed. "And I am not the only one alive because of Terran intervention. There are others. Enough to give the Covenant weight." High Command assembled in a war room carved into a basalt mesa. Holographic sand dunes rose and fell as tactical displays. Banners of the Enclave fluttered in the conditioned air. They listened as Rakesh laid out the human plea and the Gravemind threat. "The Lattice will not stop with the Blue Home," Rakesh said, his lowest arm stabbing at the star map. "If Earth falls and the Lattice consolidates in that sector, it will spread along the trade routes we all use. We can call this aid, or we can call it preemptive defense. Either way, we must act." A grizzled elder with deep scars across both jaws shook his head. "We have our own frontiers to watch," he said, "our own people to feed. Why commit ships to a cause half a spiral arm away?" Rakesh's lower right hand drifted again to his old scar. "Because this is not a transaction," he said quietly. "It is a matter of who we believe ourselves to be. Terran medics bled on our soil. They saved me when I was an unknown officer in an internal conflict that meant nothing to them. They did so knowing they would not be remembered in our books, except perhaps as a footnote. But I remember. I am not the only one." He opened a data file. Dozens of names appeared on the war room projection. Kelrun, who had received Terran aid in famines, in accidents, in plagues. "We signed a covenant of honor to our own ancestors," Rakesh said, "to stand by those who stood by us. I claim that covenant to justify this action. If you deny it, you deny that we have any honor at all." The elder's pupils narrowed. The room rustled with discomfort. Outside the war room, heat rose from the sands, twisting the air. Inside, the Kelrun struggled with their own pride. They were a hard people, used to calculating water shares and blood costs precisely. But they were not heartless. At length, the elder slammed his lower fist on the table. "Very well," he growled. "We will send a battle group, not the whole fleet, but enough to stand in the line. You, Rakesh, will command." Rakesh inclined his head, hiding the small, sharp satisfaction in his chest. He had not done this for a command. He had done it for a human who had died anonymous and unrecorded, except in one Kelrun memory. In the observation sphere of nested orbits, Curator Celix watched as Kelrun Enclave traffic shifted, as orders were logged, as the ship Sandpiercer lit its engines with blue-white fire. The debts of kindness ledger pulsed as if some unseen balance had nudged. The Orashi did not see the EchoNet message as words. They tasted it as resonance. In the deep basalt hives of the Orashi swarm on a dark, cold world, vibrations were everything. Light was mostly an abstract concept. Heat was rare and precious. The Orashi bodies were many-limbed and chitinous, their exoskeletons etched with sensory hairs that could pick up the faintest tremor. Swarm voice Chazen unfolded across a chamber like a living tapestry of legs and eyes. They were not a single body, but a composite of many Orashi linked in tight proximity, their minds braided into a meta-consciousness. When the EchoNet message reached the hive's data node, it was triaged as foreign noise until its patterns began to sync with known frequencies. An ancient tag flickered in the hive memory. Terran. Chazen extended their awareness toward the data, letting it vibrate through them. Gravemind, Lattice, Beacon Cascade. The concepts translated as multidimensional waveforms in their collective mind. At the core of the message, the human plea throbbed, not as pity, but as a certain kind of discordant chord. To all who still remember us, we cannot face this alone. The Orashi swarmed their own memories like ants over sugar. They remembered an earlier era when humans had first come to their hives. Back then, the swarm's culture had been rigid, utilitarian. Sound was for function, warning clicks, navigation beats, mating calls. Then, a Terran cultural exchange program had arrived. Humans had invited the Orashi to visit orbital habitats, to see light curtains and art installations. The Orashi had sent only remote drones at first. Their bodies were too sensitive to the harshness of the upper world. Undeterred, one human had descended instead into the hives. He had carried strange instruments, tensioned strings, hollow tubes, vibrating membranes. He had sat where the seismic channels converged and had, slowly, with much experimentation, begun to play. He had found frequencies that resonated not with human ears, but with Orashi chitin. He had shaped beats to tickle their limb joints, to vibrate through the rock exactly at the intensity their nerves could savor. It had hurt at first. Then it had delighted. The Orashi had discovered, in that dim chamber, that sound could exist not for warning or mapping, but for its own sake. They named it shared sky, because the patterns were something two utterly different species could stand under together. Swarm voice Chazen had not existed then. They had been a low-level worker in another cluster. But the waves from that moment echoed through generations. It had been one of the pivot points that led the Orashi to open themselves to art, to non-functional pursuit. It changed their culture's neural topology in subtle ways. Now, tasting the human call, Chazen felt an answering pattern rise. They sent a pulse up the hierarchy to the swarm's strategic nodes. The debate among the Orashi was geometric. They mapped risk surfaces, likelihood matrices. Assisting Earth would divert ships and drones from their own perimeter. The Gravemind Lattice was notoriously mutable. There was no guarantee any beacon cascade could wound it. But beneath the calculus ran a more primal vibration. Humans had once adjusted their own art to fit Orashi senses. They had not demanded payment. They had stayed in the hives until their lungs burned, eyes wept, skin cracked in the dryness, just to teach a foreign mind how to feel something new. Chazen pulsed this context into the threads of debate. The consensus pivoted. There was an emerging cultural rule in the Orashi hive books now, a soft law. When another mind has broadened your sky, you do not ignore its storm. The swarm authorized the deployment of drone ships and data relays toward Sol. Not war fleets, they had few of those, but something perhaps more crucial: analytic arrays, pattern filters, signal libraries gleaned from their own brushes with the Gravemind Lattice. Swarm voice Chazen shaped a final intimate pattern and stored it as an internal vow. We will weave our patterns with theirs, they thought. We will make of this cascading beacon a new shared sky, or we will fall having tried. Across space, other call recipients weighed their own balances. On a high-gravity cliff world under a harsh blue sun, Heshan Admiral Varkir stood at the edge of a precipice. Heshan bodies were lean and avian descended, with hollow bones reinforced for their planet's punishing gravity. Their feathered crests shifted with wind and mood. Varkir's crest was streaked with silver, his wing claws scarred from battles fought in thin, biting air. Below him, the cliff city clung to the rock like a barnacle, its spires carved directly into the stone, its landing pads jutting out over dizzying falls. The wind tore at his cloak, flung grit into his eyes. He did not blink as he watched a group of cadets perform cliff drills, leaping from ledge to ledge with harnesses clipped to safety lines. Their shouts were sharp and fierce. News of the EchoNet packet had reached him an hour earlier. He had gone outside before reading it, as he often did when his thoughts threatened to snarl. Now, he pinged his cranial implant and let the human message spill in. To all who still remember us, we cannot face this alone. Please, help us if you can. The words translated into Heshan as a formal dual challenge, almost absurdly. The translator reshaped polite humility into something sharper to fit local idiom. The Gravemind telemetry, however, needed no translation. Varkir had seen enough war to recognize a storm that would not yield to blades or honor codes. He remembered another storm, years ago, over another cliff city. Pirates then, not mindless Lattice, viral raiders on jury-rigged vessels trying to crack the Heshan defenses and plunder their mineral stores. The sky had been full of flame and smoke, cliffs echoing with impacts. Varkir had been young, stationed at a lower platform when an explosion had collapsed half a hangar. Dozens of civilians had been trapped under twisted metal. They had clawed and cut at the debris with their own hands, but gravity made lifting beams slow and lethal. Every second counted. Then, a small Terran Marine detachment, caught dirtside by chance during a resupply stop, had charged in. Heshan had expected them to lock down and wait for extraction. Instead, the humans had thrown themselves into the wreckage without hesitation, leveraging their lower body weight to wriggle into voids, brace beams, slip between fallen stones. One human sergeant, whose name Varkir had never learned, had found him pinned under a segment of collapsed gantry, his wing pinned at an unnatural angle. The human had wedged himself under the beam, legs braced, teeth clenched, muscles straining. He had barked at Varkir to move now, move, and Varkir had felt the weight lift just enough. Heshan instincts abhorred leaving an ally to danger, but he had been half paralyzed. Another blast had shaken the hangar. The beam had wobbled. The sergeant had grunted one last time, eyes squeezed shut, and Varkir had ripped himself free, his wing tendons snapping. He had looked back to see the beam slam down fully. The human had not made a sound. Later, limping through smoke, Varkir had found the human's body half buried, eyes open to the sky. There had been no witnesses except the two of them and the indifferent stone. No one else had recorded that moment. No commendation had listed it. It had lived only in Varkir's memory, a weight as real as the beam had been. Now, with Earth calling for aid, that memory surged up like an updraft. Varkir's people valued a simple equation. You stand between harm and those who cannot. That was what made you worthy of the sky. He pinged the kindred council. By the time he stepped into the circular council chamber carved into the cliff, the other admirals and clan leaders were already in heated discussion. Hollow images of the Gravemind Lattice twisted above the center pit. "The Gravemind eats fleets," one elder snapped. "Ought not to throw ours into its teeth." "No one else has ever turned it aside," another countered. "What makes these Earth plans different? Why risk our lineages on a Terran gamble?" Varkir strode to the center, feathers ruffling. "Because," he said, "Terrans have already risked their lives for us, unasked. Our lineages are entwined with their dead. You speak as if this is a new connection. It is not." He told them, briefly, about the sergeant in the hangar, about weight and wings and a choice made knowing no one would praise it. "You would have done the same," one admiral said stiffly, though he knew that Heshan training did not teach soldiers to hold beams for strangers in suicidal stances. "Perhaps," Varkir allowed. "Perhaps not. But the human did it without question. That is the point. Our code says we honor those who embody it, wherever they were born. I will not dishonor that sergeant's memory by pretending our duty ends at the edge of our gravity wells." The chamber fell quiet. Heshan honor was many things, but above all, it was consistent. They would not call themselves warriors and then refuse a fight where justice pointed. The council voted. The tally lights around the chamber glowed one by one. When the majority turned blue, the decision was sealed. "The Heshan kindred will send an elite fleet," the High Admiral declared. "You, Varkir, will lead it. You and your wing will fly at Earth's side until there is no more sky or no more need." As Varkir left the chamber, he felt a strange light sensation in his chest. Not fear, he had known plenty of that. Not joy, this was too grave. It felt like alignment, like a cliff run where each leap met soundstone. In the observer's gaze, Heshan ships pivoted in their orbits, drives warming. Another piece had shifted on the board. Not every story in the Debts of Kindness ledger was about war. On a bustling asteroid market at the edge of civilized space, amid a tangle of docks and neon signs, Paraket Guildmistress Pixa and Firal Caravan Lord Yevrin argued over who owned a crate of defective thruster cores. Parakeet were small, furred, and perpetually harried, with twitching whiskers and bright eyes. Pix's fur was dyed in streaks of electric blue, her tail rings clicking as she gesticulated. Viral were taller, felinoid nomads with sleek coats and elaborate braided manes. Yevran's mane carried trinkets from 100 stops. "It was in my bay," Pixa insisted, jabbing a claw at the crate. "On my manifest. Your crew dropped it there without clearing the barcode. That makes it my problem and my salvage." "Your bay is a hazard zone," Yevran shot back. "They put it there because your people were the only ones crazy enough to try and fix those things. I never signed away ownership. That makes it still my loss." Around them, a small crowd had gathered, most of them familiar with their endless bickering. Years ago, Pix's salvage crew and Yevran's caravan had been enemies, sniping at each other over plunder, undercutting prices, occasionally exchanging pulse fire. Then, humans had arrived in the middle of one of their three-sided disputes, right here on this rock. The Terran freighter captain, name lost in the noise of commerce and translation, had taken one look at the escalating standoff, with Phi-Ral raiders bristling and Parakeet engineers arming scrap cannons, and had groaned. "Nope," she had said, "we are not doing this again." She had thrown open her cargo bay, hauled out food crates from a dozen cultures, and begun cooking. Within an hour, the market was full of smells, sizzling spices, frying roots, bubbling sauces. Humans had dragged out tables, crates, anything flat, and set up an impromptu festival. They had declared, loudly, that anyone who shot anyone would be banned from the buffet. Curiosity and hunger had triumphed over aggression. Parakeet and Viral alike had edged closer, noses twitching. Humans moved among them, pressing skewers and bowls into paws. By the time the thruster dispute resumed, belly warm and tongues coated in unfamiliar flavors, everyone's mood had softened. Humans had suggested a joint salvage contract. Pixa would fix what she could, Yevran would haul and sell, and they would split profits after costs. It had become the template for their later cooperation. Now, years behind that moment, Pixa's comm bracelet chirped. She flicked it irritably. "I am busy," she muttered, then froze as she saw the origin tag. Echo Net, Sol, United Terran Assembly. Her fur flattened. "Yevran," she rasped, shoving her bracelet into his face. "Look." They watched the human message scroll by, translated into trade lingua. Gravemind. Beacon Cascade. The blue home in danger. The polite, terrible plea. "Please, help us if you can." For a heartbeat, the market din seemed to fade. The memory of cooking smells rose sharper. Pix's mind, quick even when sleep-deprived, did a dozen calculations. Sending her ship Jumbled Fortune and its sister vessels to Sol would cost fuel, time, risk. Profit margins would suffer. She thought of Terran food recipes her crew still used on long hauls. She thought of the Terran clause buried in some of her guild's contracts, a legal relic from when Ixan lawyers had insisted on clear language allowing uneconomic aid. "If Earth burns," Yevran said quietly, "we lose more than good cooks." He was not a sentimental creature. Viral felt deeply but expressed it mostly through loyalty to caravans and kin. Yet he remembered vividly a night on this very station when a human security officer had sat with him, listening to him describe the quiet fear that came between raids when a caravan had nothing to trade and too many mouths to feed. The human had offered no credits, no treaty, only a listening ear and a bottle of harsh Terran liquor. Somehow that had made the difference between despair and another day's bargaining. Pixa snorted. "We owe them crates and meals and favored routes." "We owe them being there," Yevran said. She eyed him. "You realize we will argue about who reached them first until the heat death of the universe." "Obviously," he agreed. They sent a joint ping to their respective guilds and caravans. Within hours, the Jumbled Fortune's cargo modules were being reconfigured, half for supplies, half for improvised energy handling gear. Viral raider ships were stripped of pirate markings and repainted with coalition patterns. The bickering did not stop. It simply shifted focus to logistics and trajectories. In the quiet records of the Sayalari and Ixan, these small comic moments mattered as much as the grand battles. They were the texture of interspecies entanglement. These were only a few threads. There were many others. Brannock miners on a tidally stressed moon remembered human engineers who had crawled into unstable tunnels beside them to free trapped juveniles. Holari sky cities and turbulent gas giants remembered a human gravitational specialist who had helped them rebalance a harvest array seconds before it tore free and plunged downward. Dolmari elders remembered patient Terran negotiators who had sat for weeks in slow-moving councils, eating the same bland fungi, to help two shell clans sign a water-sharing accord. Karathi theologians remembered a Terran philosopher who had read their holy texts in translation, and then, with respectful questions, steered them away from declaring a catastrophic crusade. Ixan legal scholars remembered Terran diplomats insisting that every treaty include a clause allowing for uncompensated humanitarian action, a technical point that had saved more than one planet from being sued for helping its neighbors. Nemdak's data entities remembered Terran hackers who had risked full neural burn to outwit a predatory corporate AI, freeing Nemdak's nodes from indentured processing. Uldari reef builders remembered Terran divers in awkward exosuits helping to regrow damaged coral hulls after a meteor storm, their clumsy hands careful among fragile structures. Each of these memories, and dozens more, sat in quiet databanks until the human message arrived. Then they flared, sending their emotional context into chains of decision. In the Sayalari vessel, nested orbits, Curator Celix watched the network as if it were a field seen from a height, and the observer watched Celix. Tessari fleet mobilization confirmed. Kelrun battle group deploying. Orashi analytic swarm outbound. Heshan elite wing plotting jump trajectories. Parakeet Firal joint convoy adjusting routes. Signals from Brannock clans, Holari reef kin, Dolmari tribes, Karathi protectorate, Ixan synod, Nemdak's continuum, Uldari chorus, Saalari archives, each one a small light turning toward one blue star. Celix opened a new file in the Debts of Kindness ledger and labeled it simply, The Answer. They did not yet know what form that answer would take, but they now knew one thing with archival certainty. Humans had not been forgotten. Meanwhile, Earth misread the silence. On its Aegis dawn, the days after the transmission felt stretched thin. Every passing hour without response made the echo net seem more like a tunnel through which they had shouted into emptiness. Lieutenant Amara de Souza checked the inbound channels every morning shift at 8 a.m. and every evening shift at 8 p.m. Static. Random bursts from old buoys, commercial chatter from nearby human colonies, no coordinated alien response. The pale bloom front, by contrast, moved with measurable progress. Probes at the Kuiper fringe went dark, one by one. An outlying research station vanished from telemetry in a ripple of null-wave distortion. In the Pacific Spire, Director Hana Al-Karim paced in front of a bank of screens showing refugee registration numbers. Flights lifted from spaceports across Earth, carrying children, elders, vital specialists to waiting ships clustered near New Lagrange and the Luna Ring. On the Aegis dawn, Admiral Holt convened his senior staff around the holotank. "We must assume," he said, "that if help comes, it will not arrive in time to hold the outer system." No one contradicted him. "We proceed with our own preparations," he went on. "Eleni, status of the Veil Array?" The projection shifted to show the giant ring around the sun, its segments pulsing with readiness indicators. "We can bring it to full power in 30 hours, Eleni said. "The beacon cascade is still theoretical, but the underlying physics checks out. I can tune the pulses with local lattice measurements as the front approaches. Having more data from other encounters would help, but we cannot wait on miracles." "Milo?" Holt asked, looking toward a screen where a young man's face flickered. Technician Milo Grieg was civilian by training, orbital engineer by necessity. The Veil Array control chamber around him was a clutter of consoles, cables, half-disassembled panels. He wore a harness, tethering him to the floor grid. "Array segment integrity is at 88%, Milo said. "We've got a few cracked support trusses, but nothing we can't patch. Energy routing's going to be the trick. We weren't meant to shunt that much power that fast. If we misalign, we could fry half the ring." "Try not to," Holt said dryly. Milo blew out a breath. "I left my frying pan at home, sir. I will do my best." "Sky Shield Lattice?" Holt asked, turning to his defense operations chief. Online, came the reply. We've layered every scrap of shielding we have over the atmosphere. Earth won't like the induced auroras, but it will survive most minor surges. Minor, Holt thought. There would be nothing minor about what was coming. He dismissed the briefing, then lingered as others departed. Alone with the fading hollow glow, he allowed himself a brief moment of rawness. He had grown up under skies, still bruised by the tail end of the dissonant years, when orbital strikes and geothermal sabotage had left scars across continents. Part of his choice to enter service had been a vow, half-formed but fierce, to never again let his world become so vulnerable. Now, a cosmic horror approached that made human wars look like playground fights. He felt the weight of that vow pressing against the reality of his options. Ambassador Crest's image appeared unbidden, called by Holt's private ping. "Still no word?" Crest asked. Holt shook his head. Either the EchoNet relays are too degraded, or no one is listening, or... He did not finish. "Or they are listening and deciding," Crest said quietly. "Do not underestimate how long it takes councils to admit responsibility, Admiral. Our assembly took years to codify the Terran Clause and debts of kindness policies, months to approve this call. You ask others to compress such work into hours." Holt made a sound that could have been a laugh. "We may not have hours," he said. "Eleni's worst-case estimates put the front at Neptune's orbit in less than a week. If we are alone, we will trigger the beacon cascade as late as possible to maximize disruption." Crest studied him. "You are prepared to risk Earth's destruction by your own hand." "I am prepared to risk my career, my life, and my soul," Holt said. "If the choice is between human extinction and human action that might save others at our own expense, I know which side of that ledger I want to die on." Crest's eyes were very old then. "Humanity always did know how to go down in legend," he murmured. "I only hope we are not writing the last chapter." They were not. The floodgates opened slowly, then all at once. At 3 a.m. ship's time on the Aegis Dawn, Lieutenant Amara D'Souza, bleary-eyed at her console, stared as her incoming traffic display spiked with new contacts. "Admiral," she said, voice cracking, "we have multiple FTL emergent signatures at the system's edge." Holt pivoted. "Gravemind." "No, sir," she said, fingers flying over sensor calibrations. "Mass profiles do not match. These are discrete hulls, sizes ranging from Corvette to Capital, configurations, Tessari, Orashi, and something like Sayalari." Eleni stumbled into the command deck, hair loose, eyes wide. "They answered?" Amara's console chimed again. "More emergences. Kelrun, Heshan. I'm seeing Karathi harmonics, Uldari bioships. This is a coalition." The holotank filled with new blips at the outer edge of Sul, beyond Neptune. Ships unfolded from FTL like blossoms from tight buds, their drives shedding hyperspatial residue like petals of light. Holt's chest felt strangely tight. "Open a channel," he said. "All frequencies, general hail." He steadied himself, aware that this first transmission might be recorded in a dozen archives. "This is Admiral Ryan Holt of Earth Defense Command," he said. "To the ships entering Sol, identify yourselves and state your intentions." Silence. Then, one by one, voices answered. "This is Tales, envoy of the Tessari Concord aboard the city ship Dawn Petal," came a voice like wind in leaves, rendered in human English by a translator. "We are here in answer to the Blue Home's call." This is Swarm Voice Cha Zen of the Orashi Swarm. Layered clicks and chitter harmonized into speech. "We bring analytic nodes and pattern weavers to help you sting the Gravemind." "This is Commander Rekish of the Kelrun Enclave, commanding the Sandpiercer Battle Group," a rough, scaled voice rumbled. "We owe you blood and water. We come to spend both beside you." "Heshan Kindred Fleet arriving under Admiral Varkir," came a clipped, sharp tone. "We will hold your flanks until there is no more cliff to stand on." "This is Guild Mistress Pixa of the Jumbled Fortune, with attached Firal Caravan led by Yevran," a high, rapid voice interjected. "We brought spare parts, peculiar ideas, and outstanding grudges with the Gravemind for wrecking our trade routes." Voices overlapped. Uldari Anchor Node Surreal sang a greeting. Nemdax Lens Prime Vorex pulsed data handshakes. Halari Voice in Clouds. Harrion hummed a gravitational pattern that made the air on the Aegis Dawn vibrate faintly. Holt felt air move in the room as officers unconsciously leaned toward the sound. He cleared his throat. "On behalf of Earth and the United Terran Assembly," he said slowly, carefully, "welcome to Sol. We did not expect such an answer." Tails replied gently, "You should have." On nested orbits, Curator Celix tingled with Archivist delight. This was unprecedented, so many species converging not to divide a carcass, but to shield a living world. The Coalition's arrival turned the Sol system into a complex ballet. Traffic control at New Lagrange and the Luna Ring had never anticipated coordinating Tessari city ships, Kelrun war frigates, Paraket freighters, Uldari living hulls, and Dolmari stone carriers all at once. Technician Milo Grieg, conscripted as a liaison to alien engineering crews on the Veil Array, found himself giving directions to beings he had previously only seen in documentaries. "This segment is rated to handle 3 times its base load," he explained to anchor node Surreal, gesturing at a structural strut. Surreal's body pulsed with lamplit patterns, their bioluminescent organs reacting to spectral scans. "We can integrate living reef structures here and here," Surreal said, their translator warbling. "They will absorb heat and re-radiate in safer bands. Your metals are brittle, but your design is clever." Nearby, a cluster of Brannick miners clambered over another array node, their stubby, powerful limbs carrying heavy shielding plates. Dolmari Matron Dolir oversaw the placement of an entire asteroid chunk as a stabilizing mass. Parakat Guild Mistress Pixa argued with Milo about safety margins. "If we push this capacitor bank to 120%, we can bleed more of the surge," she said, tail flicking. "And if we blow it, we lose an entire section of the array," Milo shot back. "We need redundancy, not single points of catastrophic failure." "You humans always worry about catastrophic failure," Pixa grumbled. "How else do you know where the line is if you never cross it?" "We have crossed too many lines already," Milo muttered, then sighed. "Fine, 110%. And I want 3 backup couplers." "That is almost bravery," Pixa said approvingly. On the Aegis Dawn, a war council convened. The briefing sphere was a 3-dimensional projection chamber where participants could appear as life-sized holograms. This day, it held more diversity than it had ever known. Tails hung in midair as a cascade of green and gold vines. Commander Rekish's scaled form loomed nearby. Admiral Varkir perched with impossible balance on a minimal platform. Guildmistress Pixa floated cross-legged, Yevrin's sleek bulk half behind her. Celix's elongated translucent body glimmered. Anchor node Surreal undulated slowly. Lens Prime Vorex's crystalline avatar refracted the chamber's light into patterns. Admiral Holt entered with Dr. Eleni Marku at his side, Ambassador Crest following. "For those who have not seen Sol's updated telemetry," Eleni said, "this is our situation." She gestured, and the pale bloom front's projected gray fog bulged inward. "The Gravemind's leading edge will cross Neptune's orbit in 5 days, give or take. Our outer stations will be consumed. Your fleets," she nodded to the gathered aliens, "can engage peripheral anchor nodes, but direct confrontation with the front will only slow it. The beacon cascade remains our best, perhaps only option to disrupt its structure." Painted around the sun's image, the Veil Array glowed. New extensions protruded. Tessari-grown branches, Uldari reef clusters, Dolmari stone masses, Holari gravitic tugs tethered in intricate nets. "We propose to fire a sequenced set of pulses," Eleni continued, "timed to resonate with the Gravemind's anchor nodes in adjacent interstellar space. With Orashi and Nemdak's pattern analysis, we can target key junction points. The resulting stress should fracture local lattice coherence." "And the cost?" asked Matron Dolir, her voice slow as tectonic drift. Eleni did not soften it. "The energy we must channel will exceed the array's design limits," she said. "Earth's sky shield lattice will protect the surface from minor fluctuations, but major flux will spill into orbital space. We estimate heavy damage to most unshielded platforms, some risk of atmospheric ionization events. With sufficient auxiliary absorption from your ships and structures, we can probably avoid outright biosphere sterilization." "Probably," Pixa repeated, whiskers quivering. "I do not like that word." "Without the Cascade," Eleni said, "the Gravemind will reach Earth and consume it completely. With it, We can at least injure the lattice and perhaps save not only ourselves, but many others down its projected path. Nemdax Lens Prime. Vorex's crystalline facets shimmered, internal data flows whirling. You built a tool for quiet study and deterrence, Vorex said. Now you would convert it into a universal resonant hammer. You are correct that you lack sufficient mass and field control to make it survivable for your system alone, but you are no longer alone. Uldari anchor nodes surreal inclined their tendrils. Our bioships can anchor portions of the energy into prepared storage skeins. We will hurt, but we can do this. Hollery voice in clouds. Harian vibrated a deep chord. Our gravitational tugs can flex your array's shape, redirecting some of the wavefront into solar polar regions less vital to your inhabited orbits. Dolmari Matron Dolier rumbled, "We can move more stone, bodies that do not fear heat as you do." Admiral Varkir's feathers fluffed with irritation. "You all speak as if the humans will be allowed to break their sun open with our connivance. I say no." The room stilled. Holt felt his muscles tighten. "We are running out of options," he said. "That's not my objection," Varkir said sharply. "My objection is that you plan to die, and we are here to make sure you do not." Holt blinked. Tales's leaves rustled softly. "We did not come to watch you burn nobly," the Tessari envoy said. "We came to help you live." Holt's jaw worked. "You understand the risk," he said. "Even with your help, the beacon Cascade could—" "Yes," High Listener Erkin of the Karathi Protectorate cut in, their quadrupedal form steady. "And we choose to share that risk. You imagine that sacrifice is your special privilege, that only humans know how to stand between danger and those they protect? Do not be so arrogant." There was no malice in the words, only a firm rebuke. Ambassador Crest almost smiled. Holt bristled. "We do not ask others to die for us," he said. "Our history is built on the opposite." "And ours," Rikesh said, voice low, "now includes human medics who died to pull our children out from under rubble. You would cheapen their deaths by refusing the same from us?" Eleni stared at the floor, hands clenched around her stylus. "Admiral," Talus said more gently, "you taught us to act when nobody is watching. Now everyone is watching, and you shrink from letting us stand with you. Why? Because it hurts your pride? Because you fear owing a debt you cannot repay? That is not the humanity we came for." Holt opened his mouth, then shut it. The observer felt his inner turmoil as clearly as if it were its own weather system. He had defined himself by service, by shouldering burdens, by being the one called upon. To be the one in need felt like a reversal of gravity. He saw, too, the other side. If he insisted on carrying everything, if he refused others their own agency, he would be betraying the very ethic humans had broadcast for centuries. He exhaled slowly. "You came," he said. "You would share the burden. Very well. We will design the Cascade with full auxiliary integration. Your fleets will act as dampers, shields, anchors. But," he fixed them all with a hard look, "we will not allow your worlds to stand defenseless while you bleed for us. You will keep some forces back. You will not empty your homes on our account." Amid all the courage, that was his own small insistence. Agreement rippled through the projections. They were not suicidal. They were here because they understood interdependence. "So," Eleni said, voice steadier now, "we will need to rebuild the Veil Array's routing, integrate living structures, upload Orashi and Nemdax resonance models, adjust Halari tug orbits, spread Dolmari shields." Guildmistress Pixa rubbed her paws together. "And we will need a lot of cable." Technician Milo Grieg groaned in his far-off chair. The great work began. In the days that followed, Sol's orbital space became a construction site at a scale that would have been mythic in earlier centuries. The Veil Array's skeletal rings thickened as new modules arrived. Uldari bioships fused their coral-like hulls to the array's arms, extending organic radiators and heat-sink lobes. Tessari grafted living wood onto metal to create hybrid conduits that could flex without snapping under stress. Brannick and Dolmari teams bolted enormous shielding plates and asteroid chunks onto vulnerable segments. Halari tugs looped gravity lines around everything, adjusting orbits minutely with their song-like emissions. Milo worked 18-hour shifts, catnapping where he could. At 2 a.m. one cycle, he found himself wedged between a humming capacitor bank and a Uldari growth node, helping Pix's crew thread a new series of conduits. "This isn't rated for this load," he muttered, checking numbers on his wristpad. "Then we will rate it," Pixa said cheerfully. "Numbers are just frightened little symbols. We can bully them." Milo snorted. "Spoken like a true engineer." She flicked an ear at him. "You humans built this giant ring and did not immediately see how to turn it into a weapon. That is cute." "That is not quite how I remember it," he said. "The defense contract got signed the minute someone realized what we were building could be pointed at things." They shared a tired grin. Elsewhere, Sergeant Luis Navarro stood on a new Lagrange docking ring and guided streams of human evacuees onto alien ships. "Keep moving, please," he called, directing a group of children toward a ramp leading into the Uldari worldship chorus of tides. The inside smelled of salt and bioelectric fields, but the Uldari had done their best to soften it with human-appropriate gravity and atmosphere pods. A little girl with braided hair clutched his hand. "Are you coming with us?" she asked. "Not this time, kiddo," Navarro said. "I've got to help more people get on more ships." "Will you be safe?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be as safe as anyone can be when we're doing something very brave and very stupid. That's kind of our specialty." She frowned, then let go, scampering toward a waiting Uldari guide. Nearby, an adult of an alien species Navarro did not recognize, translucent skin, internal organs glowing faintly, hugged a human teacher. "We go now," the alien said. "But we come back, to help rebuild. You taught us this word, community." The human nodded, eyes wet. Ambassador Crest wandered the temporary camp on the Pacific Spire's lower levels, watching humans and aliens share food and stories. He heard laughter, weeping, the murmur of translators. He thought, not for the first time, that whatever happened in the skies above, something profound had already shifted below. On Dawn Petal, Tails tended to a small Terran oak growing in a pot of earth soil they had cultivated. The ship's environmental controls had been adjusted to match Earth's chemistries as much as possible, a gesture of solidarity. "If we live through this," Talos whispered to the sapling, "we will plant you on the blue home. You will be home squared." Swarm voice Cha Zen pulsed pattern after pattern through Orashi data relays, fine-tuning their understanding of the Gravemind's fractal structure. In the abstract, it was beautiful, self-similar, endlessly recursive, efficient. In application, it was monstrous. They searched for flaws. Lens Prime Vorex processed streams of historical data from other lattice encounters, overlaying them onto Sol's configuration. A faint pattern began to emerge, a set of resonance frequencies that might define how anchor nodes communicated. Vorex sent the pattern to Eleni Marcoux. "If you strike here, here, and here," they said, projecting points into her display, "you may induce destructive interference. Take care. The lattice adapts." "It always adapts," Eleni said. "So will we." Admiral Holt, between strategy meetings and emergency assembly calls, carved out 10 minutes each night at 11 p.m. to record a message. He sat in a small cabin, camera hovering. "This is Admiral Ryan Holt," he began each time. "If you are hearing this, then you have access to the Sol Historical Archive. I do not know yet whether this will be a record of our failure or our survival." He spoke of the beacon Cascade, of the coalition, of his own conflicted feelings about being protected. He did not know whether anyone would ever read these logs, but the act of making them steadied him. Curator Celix, in nested orbits, updated the Debts of Kindness ledger to include current events. They created a parallel file, the debt repaid. They left room for many names. The Gravemind came. It entered the Sol system like a tide creeping into a shallow bay, inexorable and cold. From the vantage of instruments, the pale bloom front thickened. Null-wave filaments lashed outward, their strange fields scrambling electronics and transiently warping space-time. Mining platforms and unmanned probes at the edge of Neptune's orbit went dark in flickers. From the human vantage on the bridge of Its Aegis Dawn, it looked like streaks of gray and black creeping into stellar charts, swallowing sensor points. From the Orashi and Nemdak's vantage, it sounded like a discordant crescendo, structural vibrations rising. At 9 a.m. ship's time, Lieutenant Amara de Souza reported, Pale bloom front has reached the outer gas giants. Anchor node signatures detected forming near Neptune's trailing Lagrange points. Coalition fleets, Admiral Holt said over general comms. This is Sol Defense Command. Execute Phase 1. Phase 1 was delay. Kelrun battlecruisers and Heshan fighters surged forward, accompanied by human destroyers and frigates. Their drives burned bright as they arrowed toward the front's leading tendrils. Commander Rikesh sat strapped into Sandpiercer's command chair, all four hands on different controls. His crew moved with practiced efficiency around him. Target the emergent anchor nodes first, he ordered. We are not here to destroy the tide. We are here to crack the rocks beneath it. Heshan Admiral Varker's wing swooped in at vector angles that would have twisted human stomachs. Remember, Varkir snapped over squadron comms, do not chase kills. We strike, we peel away, we strike again. We buy time for the beacon, no more. Heshan ships were built for rapid, precise maneuvers in high-gravity wells. Here, in open space, they used that same agility to dance inside the Gravemind's shifting fields, darting in to plant charges on anchor node accretion masses, then leaping clear. Human frigates like the Aegis Dawn's escorts fired beam lances and smart missiles, carving through lattice drones that resembled tangled knots of machinery wrapped in semi-solid fog. Even as they fought, null-wave filaments brushed past, flickering through shields, shorting out systems. On Sandpiercer's bridge, one of Rekish's lower hands jerked as a surge shot through his console. He barked a curse in Kelrun and slammed a bypass switch with another hand. Shields at 60%, his engineer reported. We can't take many more glancing hits like that. We won't, Rikesh said. We will take direct ones instead. He was joking in the deadpan way of war veterans. It did not make the next strike easier. On the Aegis Dawn, Amara's screens filled with overlapping trajectories. Admiral, the coalition is holding, she said. Barely. Some ships have to fall back for resets. Signal them to fall back, Holt replied. We do not need martyrs yet. We need survivors who can keep shooting. Phase 1's goal was not to win, but to stretch the timeline, to allow the Veil Array to build charge. On the array, in the core control hub, Dr. Eleni Marcoux watched energy levels climb. Milo Grieg and anchor node Surreal managed capacitor cascades. Hilari tugs adjusted the ring's precise shape. Marcoux, Lens Prime Vorex said, their voice crackling over the link. We are detecting subtle frequency shifts in the lattice as it responds to your fleet's attacks. It learns. Your cascade must hit before it fully compensates. We are nearly there, Eleni said, sweat beading on her forehead. Give me a few more megaseconds of charge. That is not a unit, Milo muttered. Give me a few more hours and we will be ready, she finished. We cannot fire prematurely. The resonance must be correct. In the Orashi hives, swarm-voiced Chazen and their remote nodes spun up, weaving the latest lattice distortions into new corrections for Eleni's targeting algorithm. They worked at the edge of their cognitive speed, every error potentially fatal. On Earth's surface, skywatchers saw strange lights at night as the sky shield lattice flickered, auroras blooming at odd latitudes. People in evacuation queues whispered, argued, prayed. Some stared up in raw wonder at the cluster of alien ships visible even to the naked eye, gleaming like unfamiliar constellations. At New Lagrange, Sergeant Navarro gripped a railing and watched a Kelrun cruiser limp into dock, hull scorched. Medic teams, he called. We've got incoming wounded, non-human but bleeding just the same. He did not need someone to tell him what needed to be done. Humanity had trained itself on such reflexes. The hours ticked by. At 7 p.m., Eleni's voice came over Fleet Command. Admiral Holt, she said, the Veil Array is charged. Orashi and Nemdax patterns are integrated. Hilari and Uldari nodes are at position. We are as ready as we will ever be. Holt felt time compress. All coalition fleets, he said over General Channel. This is Admiral Holt. We are initiating Phase 2. Prepare for beacon cascade activation. Adjust to energy flux protocols. If you are in a position to serve as a shield or dampener, be ready. In the array core, Eleni looked at Milo. On my mark, she said. Begin cascade sequence. Milo swallowed. Here we go then. She keyed a final confirmation. Human fingers, alien calculations, and sun's ancient fire met. The beacon cascade began. The sun flared, not as a natural star does, in random arcs and loops, but in deliberate, constrained pulses, like a heart lashed to a metronome. The veil array's segments lit up in sequence, beams of structured energy lancing outward. The pattern looked chaotic to a casual eye, but underneath it was orchestrated according to Orashi and Nemdak's models, timed to exploit hypothesized anchor node couplings. Energy traveled along the array's ring, was amplified by Uldari organic reservoirs, refracted by Halari gravity fields, reflected by Dolmari stone bridges, channeled by human and Tessari conduits. The entire inner soul system became a luminous web. From the Gravemind's perspective, if such a thing could be said to exist, these were unexpected waves rippling into its structure at off angles. Anchor nodes quivered, their internal harmonics thrown slightly out of alignment. For a moment, the pale bloom front's advance stalled. On its Aegis dawn, every console screamed warnings. Amara's hands shook as she rode out surges, diverting power from non-essential systems. Sky Shield Lattice at 90% capacity, came the atmospheric operations report. We're holding, but barely. On the Veil array, alarms flashed red across Eleni's board. One Uldari bioship screamed, a low, heartbreaking moan in their language, as part of its hull overheated and sloughed off in a storm of glowing particles. "We have a rupture in segment 12, Milo shouted, rerouting around. The Gravemind Lattice reacted. It did not simply accept the resonance and shatter. It flexed, it adjusted. The anchor nodes that felt the beacon's touch began to emit counterwaves, a defensive reflex from something half automatic, half ingenious. More alarmingly, new anchor node seeds bloomed in mid-space between the front and the inner system, condensing out of lattice fog and stray matter. They formed a loose sphere, a cage that began to catch and redirect the beacon's energy. On the Aegis dawn, Amara's display warped. "Admiral," she said, "the lattice is bending our pulses back toward us. It's using our own cascade against the array." Holt stared. "Eleni," he snapped into his comm, "you seeing this?" "Yes," she said through clenched teeth. "We are getting feedback at intensities we did not model. If we cut power now, we may avoid catastrophic overloading, but the lattice will only be rattled, not broken." Holt saw the terrible equation. If they kept firing, the energy could cook their own system. If they stopped, the Gravemind would regroup and surge forward, now armed with a better understanding of their capabilities. This was the moment Eleni had warned might come in a different form, the moment of choice between lesser certain damage and greater possible salvation. His protective instincts screamed to shut it all down. His strategist's brain, however, whispered a harsher truth. If we stop now, we die later. If we continue, we might die now, or we might live. The coalition voices burst into his channel unbidden. "We see your overloads," swarm voice Chazen pulsed. "We can help take some of the blow." "Kelrun shields can interpose," Rakesh said. "Our hulls are thick. We have experience being sandblasted." "Heshan ships are built to fly too close to suns," Varkir said. "We will form a forward barrier." Dolmari matron Dolir rumbled, "Crown of stone moving into maximal exposure orbit." Paraket Pixa yelled, "I have improvised energy kites. Milo, tell your people to aim the excess at my ships." Milo flung himself at a console. "You are insane," he muttered, then added out loud, "Routing now." In that moment, the inversion crystallized. Humans had been ready to sacrifice themselves for others. Now, others were ready to sacrifice for them. "Holt," Ambassador Crest said softly, somehow intruding on the cacophony. "Do not decide alone. Let them stand with you. You taught them how." Holt closed his eyes for half a heartbeat. "Eleni," he said, "maintain the Cascade, coalition fleets. If you are volunteering to serve as shields, we accept. God help us all." He did not know which God, or whose. The Gravemind's redirected energy came roaring inward. Tessari city ship Dawn Petal slid into a position between Earth and a particularly intense beam. Its living hull flared, leaves crisping, sap boiling. Tails felt entire growth segments die as they soaked up the blast. "Hold," they whispered to their ship. "Hold, little forest." Heshan cruisers flared blue as their shields overloaded, their hulls charring. Varkir's flagship trembled. On Sandpiercer, warning lights exploded across Rekish's displays as they cut in front of a feedback stream. "Brace!" he shouted, all four hands locking harness points. The energy slammed into their forward shields with the force of 1,000 sandstorms. Armor plates blistered, systems blew, but the beam's angle shifted just enough to miss the densest set of veil array segments. Dolmari crown of stone burned, the asteroid carrier's outer layers vaporized, rock turning briefly to plasma. The inner denser shell cracked, shards spinning off into new orbits. Matron Dolir felt every fracture as bodily pain. "Hurt is acceptable," she said through gritted slow words. "We are stone. We endure." Parakeet Guildmistress Pix's energy kites, improvised lattices of conductive cable and reflective panels, unfurled from her ships like bizarre sails. They caught wavefronts, bled off lethal currents in long, arcing trails of light that vented into deep space. Her crew whooped manically as their hulls rattled. "If we survive this," one shouted, "I'm going to patent this design and retire." "If we survive this," Pixa yelled back, "I will personally barbecue you if you talk about retiring." On the Veil Array, Milo's fingers flew as he rerouted paths away from failing segments. Anchor node surreal pulsed emergency dampener fields, their body glowing white-hot in internal imagery. Eleni watched temperature graphs dance on the edge of meltdown. "We need something else," she muttered. "We are still just pushing and absorbing. We need to break the lattice's rhythm, not just survive it." As if summoned by the thought, Lens Prime Vorex chimed in. "Marku," they said, "Chizen and I have observed something. In the data deluge, Orashi and Nemdak's minds had detected a subtle pattern. The Gravemind's counter-resonance, in trying to redirect the beacon cascade, had inadvertently exposed a motif in its internal communication lattice. It is trying to tune itself to your pulses," Chazen said, "but in doing so, it has created a temporary harmonic vulnerability here." They projected a fractal overlay onto the system map. Specific nodes in the midspace anchor node cage glowed. "If you adjust your cascade's frequency just so," Vorex said, "and if we launch a synchronized drone strike on these points, the resulting interference could collapse this local section of lattice more thoroughly than planned." Eleni stared. "How sure are you?" she asked. "As sure as we can be without experimenting," Vorex said, "and if we do not experiment, we will die anyway." "You sound like a human," Eleni muttered. "That's not an insult in this context," they replied. Eleni's mind raced. "Send me the adjustments," she said. "Milo, get ready for another wild ride. Orashi, Nemdax, coordinate your drones." Swarm voice Chazen pulsed energy through their far-flung nodes. Tiny, agile vessels carrying shaped charges and field disruptors peeled away from protective formations and arrowed toward the highlighted anchor nodes, weaving through Gravemind filaments. On the Aegis Dawn, Holt heard Eleni's voice. "We're going to change the song," she said. "Brace." The beacon cascade's pattern shifted. Where before the pulses had been evenly spaced, now they stuttered in strange syncopation, the intervals between bursts widening and narrowing according to a non-intuitive sequence borrowed from Orashi aesthetics and Nemdak's number theory. The Gravemind's counterwaves tried to follow, faltered, overshot. At critical moments, Orashi drones exploded in the heart of anchor nodes just as beacon pulses peaked. The interference rippled. One by one, mid-space anchor nodes shattered, their accumulated mass and energy spraying outward in relatively harmless arcs. The pale bloom front shuddered. Its coherent advance rippled like a curtain yanked unevenly. Sections of lattice disconnected from their network shriveled, leaving behind inert debris. On Earth, sensors registered the lattice's withdrawal as a decrease in background exotic radiation. The sky remained lit by unnatural auroras, but the deeper threat curve bent. Admiral Holt watched these shifts on the holotank, hardly daring to believe. "Report," he said, voice flat. Lieutenant Amara's hands shook as she scanned. "Anchor nodes at inner boundary are collapsing," she said. "The front is retreating. Sir, the Gravemind is pulling back from Sul." For a moment, the command deck was silent. Then, very softly, someone laughed. It spread, shaky and disbelieving at first, then stronger. It was not triumph, it was release. "Don't pop the champagne just yet," Eleni cut in. "We still have to shut this thing down without frying ourselves." Holt took a deep breath. "Understood," he said. "All units, begin controlled de-escalation. Hold positions until the lattice is clear of the critical radius, then start shifting to recovery patterns. Coalition fleets, battered and glowing from heat, gradually eased off their frantic shielding. Some ships limped, leaving trails of vented plasma. Wrecks drifted where others had fallen, their sacrifice noted in countless logs. On the Veil Array, Eleni, Milo, Surreal, Pixa, and dozens of others guided the beacon cascade from full blast to a lower hum. Capacitors discharged in controlled bleeds, living structures cooled, smoking gently. At 11 p.m. ship's time, the last sequenced pulse faded. The sun still shone. Earth's sky shield lattice flickered one last time, then settled. On the blue home's surface, night continued for those in darkness. Day continued for those in light. People woke, slept, or stared at the sky. The Gravemind Lattice, at least in this region of space, had been wounded badly. Its local anchor node network lay shattered, its pale bloom front torn and curled away into the depths. It would not forget. It might adapt, become stranger, shift its strategies in distant sectors. But for now, Sol had survived. In the days after, the cost was counted. On Dawn Petal, Tails walked slowly through sections of the ship that had once been lush and vibrant. Now, blackened trunks stood like charcoal bones, leaves crumbled under gentle touch. "We can regrow," one of their fellow Tessari murmured, "given time, given care." "Yes," Talis said softly, "but not those exact branches. They were themselves." They thought of Captain Jun Park's old oak, still alive in its pot, leaves singed but green. It had ridden out the storm in a shielded core. "We will plant you on Earth soon," Tails whispered to it. "You will be a reminder that even burned forests can take root again." On Sandpiercer, Commander Rakish moved through a medbay filled with Kelrun and humans alike. He paused beside one bed, where a human frigate captain lay unconscious, skin blistered, monitors beeping. When Rakesh had been a young officer, a human medic had thrown himself over Rakesh's body in a bombardment. Now, in the outer defense line, one of Sandpiercer's smaller escort ships had interposed itself between Rakesh's cruiser and a null-wave filament, absorbing the brunt of the blast. The escort's human captain had gone down with his vessel. The survivors had been plucked from drifting wreckage. Rakesh touched the bedrail with one scaled hand. "We are even now," he murmured, "and not at all." In the Heshan fleet, Admiral Varkir read casualty reports. Names glowed, then dimmed as notifications were acknowledged by kin. Heshan were stoic about death in battle. That did not mean they did not feel it. He thought of the human sergeant in the hangar, of weight and wings. He thought of Heshan pilots who had died today, shielding a planet they would never walk on. "It is a good death," he told himself and his crew, "but I would like us to have fewer good deaths and more good lives." On the Uldari world ship Chorus of Tides, anchor node Surreal floated in one of the cooler chambers, their skin still showing scars from the energy flows they had helped channel. Uldari healers tended to their injured biomechs. Human children ran through the corridors, laughing, chased by Uldari juveniles in a game whose rules had already hybridized. On New Lagrange, Sergeant Navarro stood on a platform that overlooked Earth. The planet's limb was marred with unusual cloud patterns, some areas darkened where temporary power outages persisted, but the blue and green were still there. Navarro wiped a hand over his face, smearing sweat. He had worked through the battle, moving wounded, organizing supplies, loading relief shuttles. A Halari representative floated up beside him, many-limbed body pulsing gently. "You look tired," the Halari observed. Their translator rendered their deep tones into smooth speech. "I am," Navarro said, "but tired is better than dead." "Agreed," the Halari said. "We have a saying. If you can complain about the work, you are blessed with breath." Navarro cracked a grin. "We have something like that, not as poetic, though." Curator Salix moved through ETS Kindness's medbay, how fitting to be on that particular ship, and recorded. Here lay a Brannick miner whose lungs had been scorched when a gravitic shockwave tore through his compartment. Here lay a Dolmari youth whose shell had cracked taking debris that would have punctured a human evac shuttle. Here lay a parakeet technician whose fur was singed but whose eyes were bright, already bragging about how her improvised kites had saved the day. Every bed was a story. Salix asked permission, recorded audio, video, sent impressions where appropriate. The debts of kindness ledger's new file, the debt repaid, grew fuller. Back above Earth, in a conference room hastily converted into a quiet sanctuary, Admiral Ryan Holt met Curator Celix face to face for the first time. The Sayalari's translucent form shimmered in the room's light. Their internal organs shifted languidly, a visual reminder that their biology ticked at a different tempo. "You are taller than I expected," Celix said, their translator smoothing out their own slow cadence. "Bad diet," Holt replied, automatically making a joke as humans often did when uncomfortable. They stood by a large window that framed the blue home below. "Your planet is scarred," Celix observed, "but not shattered." Holt nodded. "We lost habitats," he said. "Stations. Some coastal regions will deal with strange weather for years. But the biosphere holds. Most people are alive. More than I dared to hope." Celix cradled a small, glowing data core in their long fingers. "I have updated the debts of kindness ledger," they said. "We had a section for Terran aid to others. We now have a section for aid to Terrans. 67 species answered your call in one form or another. Not all sent fleets. Some sent data, others supply, others prayers. All mattered." Holt gazed at Earth. "We never did any of it expecting repayment," he said quietly. "I know," Celix said. "That is why it was repaid so fiercely. Kindness given without an invoice writes itself into stories. Stories spread. Stories endure longer than treaties." They paused, then added, "There is another matter you should be aware of." They handed Holt the data core. He took it carefully. "Our analysis," Celix went on, with Nemdax and Orashi assistance, "suggests that your beacon cascade, combined with the Coalition's energy handling, did more than just shatter local anchor nodes. It imprinted a new pattern into the lattice fragments as they retreated." Holt frowned. "Imprinted? How?" "We do not fully know," Celix admitted, "but we see echoes in the Gravemind's residual fields, as if, in fighting it with such a coordinated multi-species resonance, we taught it something new, a habit, a scar, a memory." Holt's mind balked. "You're saying the Gravemind might remember us?" he asked. "Possibly," Celix said. "It may adapt away from this vulnerability. It may become more dangerous, or it may incorporate some portion of what it encountered here. There are some Nemdax who speculate we have altered its underlying state, nudging it away from pure consumption. It is too early to know. It may take centuries to see the effects, if any." Holt snorted softly. "So our grandstand might have made things worse or better on a cosmic scale." "That is often how grandstands work," Celix said dryly. Holt looked back at Earth. "What matters now," he said, "is that we are here, that you are here, that when we called, you came." Celix's translucent eyes softened. "You humans framed your plea as shameful," they said. "As if needing help were weakness. You were wrong. Asking for help when you cannot win alone is simply another form of courage. It invites others to be their best selves." Holt's lips quirked. "You would make a good human diplomat." "Perish the thought," Celix said, amused. They stood in silence for a moment. Below, on a hastily erected memorial platform on New Lagrange, beings of many species gathered around a simple structure. A Tessari sapling grew from a patch of earth soil. Beside it, a Dolmari stone, worn smooth, sat half-buried. Between them, a human plaque stood, engraved in multiple scripts. "To those who answered when Earth called, and to all the times we answered first." A human child and an Uldari juvenile debated whose ancestor's name should be closest to the center. A Heshan elder laughed and told them there was room enough for all. The observer watched this seed of a new era with quiet curiosity. The Gravemind would shift and stir in the deep, perhaps carrying within it some imprint of the beacon's strange song. The galaxy would have other crises, other storms. But from this day on, no historian, human or otherwise, could claim that kindness was naive, that being a protector was a one-way path to martyrdom. 67 species, and more who had not made it in time, now knew with lived certainty that when they had called once, the blue home had answered. And when Earth called, they all came.